just the density of London, the millions of people that we've talked about in London, that is a huge proportion of our country, and therefore it's not surprising from a gospel point of view that the needs are great in London. Now, that's not the needs are great elsewhere. The needs in rural areas, in seaside areas, in town centres.
Well, everywhere.
I mean, in other words, it's no different. Yeah. And so but it will often look disproportionate because the numbers are so much greater in London. And so I think the way I describe it is London is no more important than anywhere else, but because of our country and where it's placed in the world, it probably has a significance which is unique.
Hello and welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast for leaders in FIEC churches and others. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Adrian Reynolds. I'm the head of national ministries for the FIEC, and I'm joined by two wise birds today. On my left, I'm not sure that's politically left, but anyway, on my left, it's like question time this. On my left is Trevor Archer, who is our outgoing director for London, and previously worked for the FIEC as a training director.
That's correct, Adrian.
So he got the promotion. He's now director for London, but only for another month, I think. Is that about right?
That's the end of Feb. It's over to Johnny.
Yeah, we've managed to get rid of him. And on my right is Johnny Prime, who is the incoming director for London and is at the moment our director for pastoral care. Have I got that right?
I think technically I became director for London on the 1st of January.
So we have two directors for London.
Since when? Nobody told me about that.
You might almost think that London was important.
When did that happen?
We're here, brothers, to talk about London and to talk about ministry in London, why London is important. And give us some facts and figures, first of all, Trevor. Let's just put London in context. Obviously, we know where London is and all that kind of stuff, capital city. But when we talk about London, we're defining it, inside the M25?
Yeah,
that wonderful road.
Yeah.
Inside the M25. How many people live inside the M25?
Just under 9 million.
9 million. So that's an extraordinary number of people, all crowded within the M25.
And within that's 300 languages are spoken. So another stat is that it's been worked out that 86% of the nations of the world are represented. 86%. Of the nations of the world are represented in London.
It must be one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a debate, isn't it, whether it's London or New York is the premier global city.
Yeah, 9 million people. Now, let's just put our relationship to London in context. Trevor, how long have you lived in London?
All my life.
You're a real Londoner?
Yes.
And how long have you been in ministry in London?
45. Yes, 45 years.
45 years, okay. Johnny, you were born in London.
Yes, so I was born in London.
You are a Londoner. Not many people know that.
I am a South Londoner.
Okay.
But we moved to Scotland when I was 7, so I'm probably a mixture of cultures, both London culture but also Scottish culture, but very much grew up as the English kid in the Scottish
Interestingly,
school. Having fun being made all my life at school with my English accent. But then we moved back to London when I was 31. So of my 61, almost 62 years, 31 years have been spent in London.
Okay.
So 24 in ministry, 7 as a little boy. And our children are very much Londoners as well.
So both of you south of the river?
Indeed.
Well, I'm north of the river for the last 24 years. 24 years north of the river.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm an Essex boy, so I can't really claim to be a Londoner, although my grandparents are all East Enders. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that or not. My grandparents are all East Enders.
It's the Chas and Dave connection.
It is the Chas and Dave connection. And I'm really the London kind of, I'm not in London now, but I was the London new kid on the block. 8 years I had in London as Associate Minister at East London TAB, working alongside Ken Brownell, who's now retired. So I know a little bit about London, but nothing like as much as you two guys know and have experienced.
Well, I think probably I'd say most of us, Trevor knows London much better than I do because of the role he's had for the last few years in terms of the FIEC. I think he has gone all over London. I think most Londoners know their bit of London and potentially know bits of central London. But London, because of the way London boroughs, the boroughs of London are basically the size of most cities in the UK. Yeah. So there'll be 300,000 people in most of the London boroughs, but they don't operate like cities because actually everything in London lurks radially. So it's like the cheese in a Trivial Pursuit game that you go into London, but you don't often go around London.
So even the boroughs are cities within cities and have villages within those.
Well, and I think actually the villages are more important than the boroughs. Yeah. So a borough can be a very large area that has no real centre to it, and people cross the borough lines. But it's main roads, it's railway lines. They divide up and London into and river, the river as well. They divide London up into lots of villages. And my big passion would be, for a Bible church, not necessarily an FIEC church, but a Bible church proclaiming Jesus in every village is actually the only way you're going to reach
almost
London.
The old London borough. So that the boroughs are 1970 creations, aren't they?
They are.
Bringing together
the guidebooks will tell you there's something like 600 villages.
Right.
London's made up of 600 villages. And you'll find that if you go and live anywhere, because it's this localized thing where people will just think of their area and they will think of the adjoining village as something quite separate. Yeah. And that's what you don't realize just by looking at a map or just talking generally about London. It does come down to this very localized aspect very often.
And also you can go from very wealthy to very deprived very quickly by crossing over a road and then you are in a completely different area, and yet that's 2 minutes walk away kind of thing. But the areas are separate. It is unique. I think if you've not lived in London, you don't kind of get how unique it is, and it's a great privilege. And also Trevor talked about the great ethnic diversity of London. Again, you have clusters of London where a particular language is spoken. So where I was in Enfield, there's this kind of corridor of Turkish and Kurdish speakers, which you don't get anywhere else in London. No. So that's a significant outreach.
Right, I'm just going to test you here. So let's see if you know the answer to this. How many crossings of the Thames are there? How many different ways to cross the Thames? Trevor, what's your guess?
30.
30?
I was going to say 25. So.
Okay, I think you're both too low.
Oh, wow.
Really?
In fact, yes. So there you go. You can go away and check that up. And that would be your, some people go around every tube station. Johnny, your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to cross the Thames using every available crossing.
Okay, well, I've done every place on a Monopoly board.
Well, there you go. There you go. Let's just knock something on the head to start off with. So let me play the grump, okay? I can do this. It's not quite character, but I can play the grump. We're always talking about London. Everything's very London-centric. Politics is very London-centric. Funding very London-centric. London gets all the money. London gets all the attention. What about the rest of the UK? Let's just say why, as Christians, as those involved in Christian ministry proclaiming the gospel, we think London is important. Trevor, you start.
I think it's purely from this, the smorgasbord that is London.
Right.
That means that actually London Christians are forced to address issues earlier than folk in other part of the country.
Give me an example.
So let's think currently about the whole sexual identity thing, which is sadly getting pretty rampant and is spreading to other places. But I would suggest that so much of that has it's revolved around the cultural centre that is London, and therefore more immediately churches in London are having to think through that. The ethnic issues and so on of second, third generations. How do you deal with that? So it's just this. It's just a geographic factor, basically. So it's no comment upon the rest of the country whatsoever. My argument always is that investment in London, in London churches and so on, is actually investment in UK churches, because sooner or later, a lot of folk will go from London and serve in other places, move to other places, work in other places. So they'll take out that with them. But also, because of the intensity of it, we can do things, we can look at things that will hopefully bless the rest of the country. So it's not an either or, it's not a competition, it's certainly not saying London is more important, but it is recognizing they're seeing God's providence is a global city being forced to look at issues and challenges and respond to them in a multi-ethnic, multicultural setting that is going to become wider and wider in Britain. Yeah. So that's the importance of why we do this and why we invest in the way we do.
Got it. Johnny?
I think on the other side of the coin, just the density of London, the millions of people that we've talked about in London, that is a huge proportion of our country, and therefore it's not surprising from a gospel point of view that the needs are great in London. Now, that's not the needs are great elsewhere. The needs in rural areas, in seaside areas, in town centres.
Well, everywhere.
I mean, in other words, it's no different. Yeah. And so but it will often look disproportionate because the numbers are so much greater in London. And so I think the way I describe it is London is no more important than anywhere else, but because of our country and where it's placed in the world, it probably has a significance which is unique. I think, though, the thing that has helped me, I think it's been good for me to be out of London for 6 years and seeing the breadth of FIEC churches all over the country. I think that will help me in going back to focusing on London. And also I've been encouraged that there are London churches that are currently supporting and in partnership with churches in other parts of the country and helping them to do ministry. And so it's not just London focused, it's actually having, if it's Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth kind of thing, that's the right way to think. And that's how we'd want church.
You might not mention this, you're too modest, but to your credit, one of the things that you did in those 6 years is rolled out our program of local directors. So actually the two local directors we had at the beginning of your tenure, as you came up here, Johnny, were a director for London and a director for Scotland. And now we have directors in other places as well. So we're recognising actually that the investment we've put in as FIEC HQ, if you like, to London, actually we want to replicate in other places.
Well, absolutely. And I think, I may have got the statistic wrong, but it's something like we want a full-time equivalent director for every 70 to 80 churches. That's how it works out. Yeah. And that's where the FIEC, I'm glad, has budgeted for that to happen all over the country.
How many FIEC churches are there in London, Trevor?
Johnny's up to date on the stats.
Well, it's slightly varying because we've had a couple that are closing and some new plants. So it's 82 to 85.
Okay, that sort of number. And that's interesting, you're just saying about churches closing and then new plants, because I think we might think it's where all the action is, 85, growing, healthy, vibrant churches. But actually there's a great spectrum, isn't there, within there of churches in different parts of a life cycle, in different places, some places where ministry is harder, some places perhaps where ministry is more straightforward. So just talk to us a little bit, Trevor, about the spectrum of churches that there would be in London.
I think in general, the churches are smaller. And the nearer the centre you become, the smaller they tend to be. So the larger FIEC churches, which are larger ones, are out
tend to be more suburban.
Yeah. But then, so there's that going on, but which was one of the reasons behind wanting to plant the Globe Church, which the three of us and others were involved in 8 or 9 years ago as FIEC pastors, because we wanted to have in the centre a church that would be acting as a sort of a gathering place, particularly for young adults who then would stay in London maybe and go to the suburbs or whatever. So there is this great need in the centre. I think what we really need to be very humble as white Christians in London, that we can talk about the FIEC scene, but actually the big players in London are the black churches, and to a lesser extent the Asian and Chinese churches, but certainly the black churches. And so according to the stats, which are always somewhat kind of, you take a little bit lightly, but the Christian population of London is 5%,
right?
Which are church-going population, but that is hugely enhanced by the black churches and the immigrant churches. And that gets lesser and lesser the further north you go. So I think it's like even 1% in Scotland. But that does mean that God has brought people to this country. And I think one of the exciting things for me, and that's why I'm very keen, and I know Johnny will be developing this as well, is developing relationships with the ethnic church leaders. It has to be relational. It's not, and it's certainly not going to them and saying, "Come and join what we do," because why would they? They organise something. There's thousands going to it.
Yeah.
But they have challenges, and their main challenges is leaking their next generation, their children and their grandchildren, so that but at the same time, conversely, some of those churches are now getting a heart for the other ethnic groups, not least of all the white population around them, for the gospel. So I think it's a huge opportunity if we can certainly particularly help that second, third generation who are uniquely placed because they have this kind of identity crisis. Am I Nigerian or am I British? And the answer is you're both, because you've been brought up in both cultures and so on. But actually, given the diversity of London, they're brilliantly placed to be reaching an ever-increasing population of younger people that have that kind
There's a great
background.
podcast episode with Yannick, who's pastor at Stockwell Baptist Church, on that very subject. So we'll put that in the show notes because it's worth catching up with that if you haven't seen it. Johnny, is FIEC in London just a white middle-class movement? Is that a caricature that has any weight to it, or is it changing? What's the situation?
I don't think it is. And I was in London for 24 years and FIEC changed in that time. So I think initially when I was in London, FIEC churches didn't communicate to one another, didn't talk to one another very much.
Who'd have thought?
Trevor has done a great job in gathering leaders together regularly and good relationships. But even from the start of those gatherings, which was probably about 6-7 years ago, there was already always a diversity of men, and mostly men at that stage. There's more women come now, men at those meetings. So I think in our churches have tended to reflect the areas that they're in. But I think the change now, which we're seeing a trickle, is that actually the leadership of churches is growing in its ethnic diversity. Right. So some great younger men are being trained and equipped for ministry. Yannick at Stockwell, Armel and Passy, who's in Fulham, who's the assistant pastor there. There are some, that is something that's happening more and more. And I think that's one of our great challenges, that not only shall our churches be as intercultural as possible, but actually we want to make sure the leadership in our churches represents the area they're in. And the thing about London areas, obviously the bit I know best is Enfield, that even over the 24 years we were there and the 6 years since we left, the ethnic makeup of Enfield town, the village we were in, has changed hugely in that time. And the prayer, I think my prayer always is that the church should reflect the balance within their community. And so that when anybody comes in, they think, oh, there's people like me here. And it's not we're conforming to a white British stereotype, but actually the church is representing the multicultural aspect of the community in which it's placed.
And I think most of the churches that are healthy, doing well in London, reflect that ethnic diversity. But as you say, Johnny, the challenge really is now identifying and encouraging leaders from those different ethnic groups.
The challenge you see always is that you can read all sorts of analyses of how culture is going, either in the UK generally or in London. But the reality is each of the villages have their own particular culture. So the wise pastor, the wise elders in churches will be seeking to engage relationally with the people both in their churches but also in the community, because it will have a particular flavour, that culture. And the prayer would be that then the church is relating to that culture appropriately and letting rightly the different ethnicities, the different cultures shape church culture.
I guess with such a large number of churches generally, thinking more broadly about evangelicals in London, it would be easy to think that none of London is unreached. In the sense that, you can jump on a tube or on a bus and you can be in another part of London, reasonably quickly, reasonably easily. Public transport's very good and that sort of thing. But there are parts of London, aren't there, Trevor, that are, there basically aren't churches.
That's
gospel
right.
churches.
And I think, so West London, especially the Asian and Northwest London, similarly, southeast, there are these pockets. But even if you take a place like Chessington, where you'd say, okay, there's a church here in Chessington, but the size of Chessington as part of the borough of Kingston is 20-odd thousand, and there's 500 people at Chessington. You're still if you planted 2 other churches in Chessington, you're still not.
And I think that's the point, is the density. And so many people, and the reality is, if you talk to people don't leave their village apart from to leapfrog somewhere else. So the idea they would get in a car and drive to a church in the next borough, they're not going to do that.
It's very hard, isn't it, if you haven't lived in a city, to appreciate the density. Yeah. I think I remember when I moved from rural Hampshire to East London, we looked up NHS doctors who were to register with a GP. So I typed into the NHS website, type in your postcode and you type in NHS doctors. And I discovered that there are something like 35 GP surgeries within half a mile of where I was going to live. This is absurd. I come from a place where there was one GP surgery. How can that be? And the answer is because the density of population is so extraordinarily high that actually that's the kind of infrastructure you need to support it. Now, ironically, if you then typed in number of evangelical churches within half a mile of where I lived, you get one. Yeah. So there's a disproportionate, there's a mismatch there, isn't there, actually, between the number of churches that are needed to reach people, even in places where there are churches.
And the thing is, you're not going to say to your neighbour, please come to my church and you have to get in a car to go. Actually, a lot of people in London don't have cars either. Yeah, the transport system is brilliant. It's a wonderful transport system. You can get anywhere on transport, but you therefore have got to say, how can we take Jesus to where people are rather than expecting them to come?
Which is the true wherever you are, isn't it? Wherever you are in the country. Commuter church is fine for Christians.
Yes.
Actually to get in your car and to travel, even if you have to travel 25 minutes because there's no good evangelical church, well, you're going to get fed there. You're going to get helped. You're going to get loved. But actually, in terms of reaching out, that's really where the problem comes, isn't it?
I don't like slogans really, but sometimes slogans help. But one of the ways to think is I'd love for there to be a community of those who belong to the Lord Jesus in every community, because that's how you reach the community. That's what it's about. And then what you hope and pray is once churches, local churches, gospel communities have been created, they'll then start to have concern for the next village, as it were, because people will start coming from them, and then you start doing something there. Now, you look at the map and you think, could that ever happen? Well, it doesn't have to be FIEC who are doing that. We want to have a generous heart to all those who are proclaiming Jesus, including the black churches, the Asian churches, and so on.
So let's explore that a little bit more. It seems to me, Trevor, that we've talked about this before. Partnerships are important wherever you are, but especially in London, where actually language may be a barrier or culture may be a barrier. Gospel partnerships, gospel-hearted partnerships, are really key to the success of the growth of Christianity in the capital. Isn't that right?
It is. I'm not sure it's happening a great deal. I think.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think, I'm talking in general terms now, as a white church and church leaders, we operate on a functionality. Yeah, we'll do stuff together to achieve a purpose. Whereas black and Asian churches, the driver is relationship. I'll do stuff with you because you invite me to your home and because we've built a relationship. So I think there's a mile to go on that. But I think there's
and it's easy to be tribal, isn't it, in a big city?
Oh yeah,
because you can find someone else in 9 million people who thinks the same as you.
That's right.
So it's kind of it's an easy, natural place to be.
Yeah, but I think there are. So that's why I think something like London City Mission is a key player in London, and why that is that they transcend all the evangelical tribes, so to speak, and they are trusted by them. And why is that? Is actually because they're not asking things from people. They're offering all the time just to serve. How can we help you serve your mission in your community? They're generous in that. And to me, that's always something that I think I want us to emulate within FIEC, because it's that generosity of heart that will actually build the relationships upon which things will then happen. And you've got to take a 5, 10, 20-year view on this. And that's where you go to the second generations as well, because those relationships will will be the ground, the soil in which things will happen. It's not that let's put on an event together. That's how we tend to think as well.
That's very functional, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas theirs is, the question is, have you invited that black leader to your home? Is all this kind of thing which matters so much, and then there's levels at which you're going to work together. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to plant a church together, but I do think you want to have the heart that says, I'm more interested in having a live church, whatever its label, biblical church down in the community, rather than a moribund FIEC church. I'm not saying the FIEC church tomorrow, but you know what I mean? It's that thing, it's the kingdom that matters. And therefore, if we have that disposition towards one another, and seek to do that within our context in London especially, that's the thing that grows relationships. So for me, being involved with London City Mission has been a huge blessing. I know Johnny's going to continue that, because I do think the heart that they have for the local church is something that's so twinned with where we're at.
Back in the autumn, there was a big LCM gathering at Westminster Chapel. Trevor actually preached at it. But it was wonderful the way in which LCM exemplified the diversity of evangelical Christianity. And what also encouraged me was there were loads of FIEC pastors there, not up front. Trevor was the only one from us up front, as it were, but actually participating, engaging with in the kind of social gathering afterwards, engaging with people of different stripes, as it were. It was really good. I was very excited by that. And some of the stuff LCM are doing, especially to do with evangelism to Muslims, helping church to engage with the different cultures that they're among. They are doing a great servant-hearted job that honours Jesus.
And their big thing, historically always been this, isn't it? Is serving the poor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going to the poor and unreached. And I think their figures would say that there are over 3 million people in London who have never heard the gospel.
And they are the people who never leave their villages.
Yeah.
They just stay where they are, no cars, go to the local shops. They have they may live in a big city, but they have a tiny worldview as a result.
Let's talk a little bit about planting and revitalisation. I think one of the striking things as you travel around London, as you drive around London, is just the number of church buildings that there are. Obviously, there are areas in London which have had an extraordinary Christian heritage, which has often been lost, or churches which have often declined and closed. Johnny, when you were in Enfield, you both planted and revitalised, did a bit of both. What's the place for planting and revitalisation today in London? It might seem kind of wise at one level just to create large churches which have are able to self-sustain, and it's nice people can come along and spend time with hundreds. But there's a really important place, isn't there, for planting and revitalisation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let me give you an up-to-date example, because I walked around this place just the other day. Right. In northern Enfield, northeastern Enfield. Yep. Eastern Enfield is the old industrial part of Enfield. It's
Enfield Rifles, Lee Enfield, is that right? Okay.
Exactly. Yep. All those things, motorbikes, they were all made there. Okay. So it's very industrial, and or post-industrial now.
So just locate that. So if you just, people might not know.
Right. If you look at London and think of it as the M25 is like the face of a clock, Enfield is at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
And is on the A10, which is the road that goes to Cambridge.
Just inside the M25.
Just inside the M25. Okay. And there's this area called the Elsinge Estate. Now, when I was living in Enfield, that was always in the local papers as the worst place, in terms of drug gangs, etc., etc. And LCM have an old building there. The church I was part of in Enfield, privileged to be part of, had been talking about using this building for a long time because it's not being used at the moment. And so the Enfield churches, there are 5 churches in the borough of Enfield now, are working together to plant a church. They've appointed a church planter. He's currently gathering a team. It's hoped he'll have at least 2 elders with other elders with him leading this church plant. And the reality is, the people in the Elsinge Estate aren't going to hear about Jesus unless...
They're not going to travel into Enfield town.
They're not going to travel to Enfield town. They either go to the local shop or they get one bus that takes them to the Sainsbury's, which is on the A10, and then they'll get the bus back. That is it. There are 2 primary schools on the estate that are
it's all very self-contained.
It's very self-contained. I walk around it and you just think, it reminded me in Edinburgh terms of Niddry, where Mes McConnell works, or Gracemount, where Andy Prime works. It feels the same. And there's just this need of these, however many, I think it's, I'll get the numbers wrong as to how many homes there are, but the number of homes on that estate, you just think those people aren't going to hear about Jesus unless people go. And the great thing is, when gospel-hearted people are willing to move from their nice, comfortable middle-class area and go and live on the Elsinge estate, for example, and say, and that is the only way to do it. You can't parachute in and go in and do Sunday. You have to embed, be part of the community. And that is important. And often the churches that need revitalized are in those kind of areas. And probably have started to decline because the people, often what happens is, as people come to know the Lord Jesus, their lives change and sometimes they therefore improve. And often then the original founders who had a heart for those churches have moved out of the area, and they move out and all of a sudden no one lives in the area anymore. And revitalization really has to follow the same principles in many ways of church planting, that you have to be a community within the community to reach the community.
Trevor, I want to ask you a slightly more difficult question, which you can be honest about because you're about to go, so people can send their. We'll furnish your home address to anybody who wants it. They can come and pick at your house. Some FIEC churches have declined and even closed. Why is that? Why in general terms, perhaps even in specific terms, why do churches decline in London, given that it's such a vibrant place, there's so much going on? What are they failing in?
I think it's essentially a failure of leadership, and it's a failure of us to invest in leadership. So one of the things Johnny and I have been talking about, and I think is like, what provision do we make within FIEC in London for training elders? Because when I came into the training job, I did a survey amongst our pastors. 200, 300 of them responded. What do they want help with training leaders? Now, I think some of that has happened, but there's a long way to go. For the most part, people become elders and they're good, godly men. But what preparation, what input theologically and practically have we given there and help? So the result of that is that there are people in leadership who are good people, but probably for the most part don't have a great leadership skill and can get stuck into this kind of last bastion of the truth, keeping the doors open. So it's not until the desperate comes around that they then eventually reach out. Now, actually, I'm really passionate about revitalisation because I think it's those churches in those localities that are in the longer term are going to be more fruitful than church plants.
Yeah, they're often in the right place, those places.
Because they're in the right place. They've got property, they've got manse, they're known in a community, they've got loads of things going for them, which if you're a church plant, you're desperate for and are aware that you haven't got it after 5 years. So I think that's why these churches have failed. And sometimes the wrong people in leadership. So I think invariably it's leadership 9 times out of 10. And because they've grown in a culture where there wasn't that kind of investment there, plus maybe a culture of independence that didn't encourage that.
But that's helpful to hear, because actually even a culture of a culture of isolationist independence is still a failure of leadership, right?
It is. Yeah.
It's actually that's the root issues going. You could look at a church and say, well, it's because they don't sing this, or because they do this a certain way, or they don't do that a certain way, or they haven't adapted in this way. But actually, each of those things is at root a failure of leadership.
And if it's going to change, so I've known churches that have attempted to go and help, and I think sometimes I keep saying to people, you just need to be patient. If that church at the receiving end just feels that you want to get hold of their building, then understandably they're not interested. If on the other hand they feel that you love them and you have a genuine care for them and you're going to be patient, you're going to work with them, then I think the sky's the limit then. So often this fails when people say, I've tried it, it didn't work yet, but the way you tried it was to come in, bish, bash, bang, do it this way. And that's not the way. You've got to get alongside them. Now, I'm not saying that's invariably going to end in a happy way, but at least I think that opens the door more readily.
Yeah. Johnny, we're almost out of time. What's top of your to-do list? Apart from moving house.
Well, moving house is a pretty big thing in our minds this week.
In terms of the actual work.
In terms of the work, I think recognizing I have more to learn than I know.
Yeah.
So I'm meeting with people, as many as possible, which is going to take a while to do. Seeking to engage with the folk like London City Mission. Some of the black leaders have already got a meeting planned with a South American church leader in the next few weeks that I'm looking forward to. And probably the headings I probably have in my head for how we're going to go ahead is I want to be clustering churches together so they're connected with each other locally. I want to be available to help pastors and churches where they need help, so be a servant to them, and also seeking to represent the FIEC churches in connecting with the other gospel-hearted groups in London.
Well, the Lord bless you as you do that, and thank you, Trevor, for all your work. And do please pray for London. There are... Well, to use that Jonah phrase, there must be over 8.5 million people who don't know their right hand from their left. So if for no other reason than a concern for the lost, we ought to be praying for London, shouldn't we? And the work of gospel churches, rejoicing in people who are being reached, rejoicing in many people who are being saved, but praying the Lord would do so much more. Let's pray for that. Bless you in your work, guys. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Independence podcast. We'll catch up with you soon.